Welcome to Indie Business Club, the podcast for independent creatives, freelancers, founders, and business owners. She's Mel Barfield.
And he's Ben McKinney, and we're both copywriters and business owners sharing tips and advice we've picked up along the way. This episode is called Heart-Shaped Box, and it's all about niching. On the show, we'll discuss the benefits and constraints of niching, niches we've explored ourselves, and things to think about if you're considering niching.
And we've also got the usual suspects, a voice note from an expert on today's theme, and Mel's favourite part of the show, Your Friend and Mine, where we shout out a person in our network who we think is great. Niching, Mel.
Tried it.
Do you want to... Tried it, yes. I don't think I ever have tried it, but we'll discuss that in a minute. Do you want to give us, for the benefit of our listeners and everybody in the audience, so we're all on the same page, do you want to give us a definition of niching?
Definitions are definitely your job. But when we talk about niching, we're both copywriters, so our knowledge of niching is more around writers' niches. So you might have somebody who's niche expert in medical writing, like Hannah Rose, who conveniently used to be a doctor. So, you know, if you're going to go to, if you're going to niche, that's probably a pretty sensible one to do as an ex-doctor. And other people who niche by, instead of niching by industry, they will niche by the type of writing that they do. So we always talk about copywriting, but this is relevant for anyone in a creative industry or marketing or anything like that. Your niche can be the industry you want to work with, or it can be the type of work you want to do, or it can be the super niche would be picking something where you've niched in both areas. So it might be the example that we've used before we started recording was writing case studies for llama farms or something like that. So have a really, 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 really niche subject that you market yourself as doing this very specific thing for very specific people.
Yes, that would be tremendously narrow focus, though, wasn't it, in terms of how many llama farmers are there in the UK and how many
you
of them
just enjoy saying
services.
Llama farmer, don't you? But that's it. It can be really, 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 really niche. And then you are potentially vulnerable. Like if there's some horrible, horrible catastrophe that we definitely hope doesn't hit the llama farming industry in the UK.
What's happened to the llamas, Mel?
They're all fine, as far as I know. Other niche industries are available. So you are opening yourself up. The benefit is that you become the known person for doing whatever. The danger is that industry gets struck by some massive change, positive or negative, that means that your services are either no longer needed, or everyone floods the market with the same service you're doing, or if somebody puts a YouTube video out on how you can become a 6-figure side hustler llama farmer case study writer. So yeah, it can leave you a bit vulnerable in some ways, but also super, super strong if the market's booming and you're the absolute go-to person, the name on everyone's minds. Then it can be wonderfully lucrative to be to have a niche in your specific area.
So I've never done it. I was probably a little sniffy at one time about the idea of niching, and I was pretty against it, certainly from my own point of view. I just didn't want to go down that road. I felt like doing the same thing over and over again would be boring. I'd come out of a repetitive job that I'd done for a long time, and I really wanted the variety. I wanted different clients in different sectors. I wanted to write for different industries, and I wanted to do different types of projects. But actually that really wide and broad focus came with its own difficulties, in that it was then hard to pick up the right kind of clients. I brought in work kind of fairly consistently, but actually finding clients that were really a good fit for me, I think that became more difficult. And yeah, so for listeners that don't know, when we were planning to make what has become this podcast, we did some LinkedIn live audio events first. And one of those was about niching, and it got a really good response. It was really popular. And I think it kind of opened my eyes to it a bit. And it made me think of a time just before the pandemic where I'd written a manifesto for my own business, and I'd started doing one for a couple of other businesses as well. And I remember having this one thought, like, wow, I really enjoy this. It's a really creative, collaborative project, maybe I could become Ben, the manifesto guy or the manifesto writer. And I just never followed through on it. I didn't really kind of investigate it, or didn't go for it. I think I'd just redone all my website and kind of done all my branding and marketing and everything. So it then felt like a big effort to kind of stop that and change and redo everything. Yeah, just never did it. But I think now, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I reckon it probably would have been quite good for me.
So niching, or I'd just like to acknowledge our American listeners, because 10% of listeners are in America. You might know it as niching. We're not going to call it that, but we still love you. There's this concept called ikigai. No, ikigai. I've got it. I'm literally reading it and I don't know how to say it. So apologies. It's IKIAGI, which is this super duper Venn diagram that has what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. And the sweet spot is right in the middle. Well, allegedly, there's an argument against doing something that you really, 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 really love doing and doing it to be paid. Because as soon as you do, like if you've got a really amazing hobby that you absolutely adore doing, then at the moment it becomes something you get paid for, you can kind of lose the joy a bit. But if you can find something in the middle-ish between what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, what you're good at, then that's probably going to be a pretty sweet career for you. So it depends whether the world needs and will pay for manifestos and businesses. Maybe it would have been something you really enjoyed, but no one wanted. Who knows? That's where you got to test the market.
Yeah, it could have been.
When I first went freelance, I'd come from years and years and years and years of working in local government. So I thought about niching into writing for councils and doing bid, and I did do a bit of that, and writing bids and stuff. But it's not like I can do it pretty well because I've been doing it so long, but it isn't something, and I can get into that voice, that council voice instantly. But I don't love it. So I don't enjoy doing it. And and it's also probably not a very lucrative industry either. Then I just decided to be a generalist when I first started, and then tested a few things out.
You did consider like writing for cheese, didn't you?
I do love cheese. I had a very brief, maybe even just a few months, if that, foray into food and drink, and soon realised for various reasons, like there are a lot of boring sounding cheese brands for a start, or food and drink brands, and they often go to an agency for everything, including their branding and package design and stuff. So I wasn't finding a huge amount of interest. That was what the world needs. The world didn't need me to be a food and drink writer. I then switched to doing personality filled copy, and that being because that's something that I find really comes easily to me. And so that's a very broad niche. And then more recently, since having a couple of back-to-back successes at the Women in Marketing Awards for tone of voice work that I don't like to go on about, and you don't like to listen to me go on about, Ben, I decided that tone of voice was a very natural kind of niche to start pursuing a bit more, talking about it a bit more, learning a lot more about it, making that my thing. The idea of a niche is to be the go-to person for whatever it is that you do well. So yeah, that's why I've kind of decided to go down that path. What about copy or die? What's your niche stance? I mean, you love niche writers.
Yeah, we do love niche writers. Thank you for mentioning that, award-winning copywriter Mel Barfield.
I glossed over it quickly. Come on, let's move on.
I will never tire of telling our listeners that you are award-winning. I think with copy or die, Dave and I have talked about this a couple of times. We haven't niched in terms of we are the agency that does this. So for example, tone of voice. We love doing tone of voice work. It's quite often the first thing that we'll suggest to a client when somebody comes to us. Because most of the clients that find us don't tend to have up-to-date tone of voice guidelines or have never had them. So for us, if they then want to start talking differently, it makes sense to begin at the foundation and produce that. And we've had some advice in the past that could or perhaps should be what we become known for, that we become known for doing tone of voice. And then once we're in with the client doing tone of voice, that we can then move on and offer other services once that's done. A coach described that to me as land and expand, which is a phrase I found unpalatable, but anyway. And I don't think that's what we want. We don't want to be known as a tone of voice creation agency, because in our mind, if a company came to us that did have tone of voice guidelines, we'd still happily work with them. And honestly, the work that Dave and I really enjoy doing, I think, is probably more, certainly on Dave's side of things, ads, short copy, really impactful, kind of hard hitting and clever, lines. But the whole business model of Copy or Die is that we work with brilliant freelancers from all sorts of different industries and niches. So we're probably quite well placed to talk about it, in that I can see it from both freelancer or, service provider type of angle, and also the client angle, because when we have a lead that comes in, if it's in, I don't know, for example, SaaS is a kind of client we're working with a SaaS client at the moment. It's easy for us then to look at our list of freelancers and say, who's great at doing this? So if you're a person that's known for doing that, then that makes it easier for us to find you. And whatever industry, whatever kind of thing that you write, we needed someone with environmental kind of copy ideals recently. So again, it was just easy then to go, right, this person talks about that or has niched themselves in that way. That makes it easy for me to then approach them and say, we need you for this. But yeah, I don't think it's something that we've wanted to do in terms of like an agency. We haven't got that narrow focus. That might be something that changes in the future, but yeah, not for now. I think we're making the most of other people's ability to niche.
I think it's also worth mentioning that there might be situations where if a client wants to branch out to a new audience, or they're trying to make their content more accessible to the masses, then having somebody whose niche subject that is might not necessarily be the best thing, because you need someone who can look at it as a layperson, obviously with all the skill set, but to be able to look at it as the every person and ask all of those questions that a member of the public would ask, and not just slip into jargon land and kind of know. So there might be situations where you purposefully don't choose someone who has the specialism, because you want that kind of Joe blogs, Joanne blogs, kind of view from the outside.
Yeah, that's an interesting viewpoint from kind of like the client side of things, isn't there? And I think from the freelancer, the idea of niching, the last episode that we recorded and put out is about goal setting, isn't it? And this is quite an interesting companion piece, in that if you're a freelancer that is looking at niching, your goals might be, and we both have similar goals to this in terms of want to work a small amount of the day because of family,
as little time as possible
for the school run, for example. No. Well, yes, obviously, I think that's a very good goal to have. But in terms of kind of building a business around our families, I often do the school run. You often do the school run. We need to work at certain times of the day. So if you're thinking, I can niche and get really, really good at this, and your example of bid writing is a good one, because if you can be the person that does bid writing and actually you don't mind the repetition and you don't mind the fact that, like you said, I could do that in my sleep almost, you're then maximizing your earning potential in a short period of time, which might then fit in with your overall goals that you set. It's just an interesting viewpoint. I'm much more open-minded to it now, I think, than I was, say, 5 years ago. And I kind of regret that. I think I might have made some different decisions if I'd been a bit more open-minded to it then.
Yeah, I think there's a real, maybe you didn't do it because there was so much of a public kind of consensus that you must niche, and you don't like to be told what to do. So maybe that's why, because everyone's saying you absolutely have to niche, you have to niche, you have to niche.
That is my character, and you know that. I think as much as anything, I'd come out of, I'd been running a business doing an incredibly repetitive job for a long time. And I just wanted, I retrained as a copywriter because I wanted to do something creative. But interestingly, that, the Venn diagram that you talked about, what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for. The thing that I thought I would love was the creative open box idea of broad focus, writing about one thing one day, learning and writing about something else the other day. And actually I found it, given my time constrictions, that almost kind of played against me in a way. And actually niching probably would have been the right thing to do, I think, to say, I'm going to do this.
Really helpful, yeah.
I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it for this kind of client. There was the only kind of niching thought that I had was I wanted to work with a certain type of client. So I could maybe say that I niched by the type of client that I wanted to attract, but still found it difficult because it wasn't like really narrow focus, and it wasn't, this is the direction you're going and these are the kind of people that you're going to attract doing it. So yeah, I think now I'd make a different decision.
Now we're going to hear from somebody who has got a niche. It's Io Abbas. She's a marketing specialist in the built environment, working with housing developers, engineers and architects. She's gone all in on having a niche, and she even has a podcast called Podcast Pals. It's not called that. It's called The Built Environment Marketing Show. Here's what Io has to say.
Hi Mel and Ben, it's Io. In terms of niching, which is one of my favourite topics, when I started my business 5 years ago, I decided to niche in an area which was called the built environment, which is basically working with architects and engineers. I chose the built environment because it was a term that people weren't really using that much, so I could own it and own that space and build a brand and I guess personal brand for myself around that. And it just meant I could stand out from others, and it gave me a good, I guess, platform to build my business from. And for me, it was also a really good way for people to signpost potential referrals and clients to me. So it also helped me to kind of get work as well. So I thought it was really, really useful to niche because of that when I was starting out. And then, to be honest, it doesn't preclude me from working with others. It's just that I might not share it in public who else I'm working with who's not in the sector. But at least I've got the choice to do other things as well. And I think the other thing for me is that you don't have to niche a business in terms of its service. There are so many other ways that you can niche your business, from your offer and other things like that as well. Hope that helps. Bye.
It does help.
It does help, definitely. Thank you, Io.
I loved that she said it helped her own that space.
Yeah.
That's what we were saying, wasn't it? About being the go-to person, standing out from others, and the person that other people mention when
the signposting
somebody
aspect.
Needs, yeah.
We haven't really talked about that, but that's really important. The fact that you then become really easily referable.
It's made me think as well, not just about work referrals, but for example, podcast invites. So if somebody's got a podcast, and they're looking for guests in a certain field, then yeah. I mean, I find nothing more rewarding than seeing something on LinkedIn or hearing that somebody needs a piece of work, or even getting a direct inquiry from a client and being able to go, I can't help you, but I know exactly who can. So niching is really helpful for the referral side of things. Gets me all warm and fuzzy.
You can connect with Io on LinkedIn. You can find her at her website as well, which is abbasmarketing.com. And the link to her podcast is abbasmarketing.com, MITC-podcast. Well worth a listen.
And just in case anyone was wondering about spelling, Io is Alpha Yankee Oscar and Abbas is Alpha Bravo Bravo Alpha Sierra. I'm going to keep doing that until I can't be bothered anymore.
Of all the joys of making this podcast, the fact that the phonetic alphabet has, come through so strongly is just one of them.
I just don't get to use it anymore. So now I'm making the most of it.
Let's wrap up niching then. What would be a negative to niching? So for me at the time, it was doing the same type of work all the time and only kind of not having the variety, I suppose. And then I guess we've talked about really ultra focus niching, where you might, I don't know, would you limit your customer base massively if
paint yourself into a corner.
If you were the content marketing expert for llama farmers, it would just be, you really are relying on there being the only one in that field, I suppose, aren't you?
Yeah, and also that, like you mentioned about the repetitiveness of writing about llamas all day. getting a bit bored of your niche. And also, I think if I had like 3 clients and I was writing the same kind of stuff for them, even though they'd all have different tone of voice, I'd find it really hard to make sure that, like, I like having a bit of variety in who I write for. So like my retainer client is a cider company, so that's a really specific thing. I wouldn't, if I then had another cider company to write for, I think I'd struggle, even though I now know all about how the fermentation process works and all that kind of stuff. Like that's a really relatively simple thing to just learn fresh each time. If you're doing more complex stuff, then yeah, that's when, if we're talking about the pros of niching, stuff like medical, SaaS, the really complex, or legal. I know some copywriters who specialize in legal. Like, you don't want to be paying a copywriter an extra day or two's money so that they can learn about the thing that a niche copywriter who is a specialist in that subject can just know, already has all that information in their head and can get straight into it. So the pros are, makes you much more hireable by very specific people with specific needs. And because of that, you can probably charge more.
Okay, it's time for your favourite part of the show, Mel, the Your Friend of Mine feature. And this week's friend of the show is somebody that also does have a niche. It's almost like we planned it. This week's friend of the show is Raymond Manzer, who is a sustainability copywriter working with climate organisations and sustainable brands. He's got the best mission statement from his website, which is raymondmanzor.com. My mission, to persuade so many readers to go sustainable that I write myself out of a job. Nice work, Raymond.
Lovely stuff. I love Raymond. His website is raymondmanzor.com. I won't do the phonetic alphabet because I feel like that is going to become a tired bit quite quickly.
There'll be a link in the show notes.
There'll be a link in the show notes, because Ray also has a Substack, and he invited me to follow his Substack via the postal system. I had a little letter in the post and it was so charming. And he's a lovely, charming man. I met him in real life at CopyCon last year. And hope to see you again soon, Ray. Thanks for listening.
He's a real supporter of the pod, isn't he? Yeah, we always get nice notes from Ray. So thank you for that. You can find him on LinkedIn too. Well worth a follow.
Yep.
That'll do for today. If you're enjoying the show, there are a few ways you can support us. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Amazon, please leave us a review.
Yep, we're both on LinkedIn, so connect with us there as well if you like. And you can leave us a testimonial that we can brag about by emailing show@indiebusinessclub.com. And if you're really enjoying the show, you can buy us a coffee at ko-fi, we still don't know how to say that, ko-fi.com/indiebusinessclub. And every penny of your contributions goes towards helping us make the show.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.
Bye.